I want to thank you for being here today for this weekly devotional. I want to think some about our influences within the world as a child of God and who we are, and go back and think about your life as you lived it. I know that there were times when I would be given good influences. I was raised under good influences. But as I began to get a little older, I began to see other things that might be more enjoyable, seemingly, to a young man. And I was persuaded with influences to partake in some of those situations and ideas. And we find ourselves being led in places that we've never been before. And then as I got older and began to live a life that was more befitting a young man who was a child of God, I began to look around. I began to realize those who influenced me and the things that they were influencing me with and what it led to. And the things that were there, I'm glad to say, outweighed those things where I was headed. I had different influences at different times in my lives, but I want us to think about this idea that as a child of God, our influence upon those who are around us. In Proverbs, the 12th chapter, in verse 25, we see, here is a king, Nadab. He says, Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the second year of Asa, king of Judah. And he reigned over Israel 2 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he walked in the way of his fathers. He was influenced by his father. And his father led him astray. But he says, and his sin, which he made Israel to sin. Not only was he influenced by his father, but he influenced the greater whole of Israel to sin against God. His influence was great. And so we need to think about how great these influences are. What they determine sometimes is the soul of man. They can destroy completely. And sometimes it may be a very small thing that one does as a child of God that drives someone away, their influence. We think, well, our influences are visiting with them, talking to them, but I can say things out of character. I can be a person who just lives a different kind of life, or I live one kind of life and speak another kind of life. That's an influence. So everything I say or do or things I represent, they influence those around me. In Matthew, the 5th chapter, this idea of being a Christian, he says in chapter 5, verse 14, he says, you are the light of the world, a city. Let's go back, 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt of the earth has lost its taste, this idea that one has given them over to God, he has sealed a covenant. We are looking at that and realizing that there's some more goes with it. In the Old Testament, the salt sealed the covenant, or was the seal of the covenant. He said, how shall it be so? How shall saltiness be restored if I have given myself over to God and yet I am living a life that has done away with God? And compared to that salt that has lost its abilities. If salt has lost its taste, how can it be restored? It can't. I want us to think about what that looks like. It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are a light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. This idea that once light is light in the darkness, you can see it for miles and miles. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. That would be foolishness. We light a light so that it might be seen. When we become a child of God, we become a light unto the world. But on a stand, it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. You know, if I'm going to tell someone that I'm a child of God, then I need to be living that life as a child of God. I need to be accepting responsibility for who I am and who I've told I would be to God, that I would represent Him. So often we find ourselves falling away. We find ourselves living in the world, or we find ourselves with our peers and saying and doing things that we should not do. We have to be careful of those things. We have to be careful of how we represent ourselves because we represent God, or we are supposed to be. So often, even as a child of God, if I'm around my peers and I begin acting like some of them, I begin living like some of them, I begin speaking like some of them. I say things that I shouldn't say, or I act out of great uh, anxieties, or I speak before I think, and I say something. It may be true, it may be there, but I've shown the world something of myself that I should never have shown. In Proverbs, the 12th chapter, Solomon sums it up in verse 26. He said, "One who is righteous is a guide to his neighbor, but the way of the wicked leads them astray." This idea of if I'm going to live in the world, not of the world, in the world, if I am a child of God, I must present myself as a child of God. I am an influence. I can lead people to God, or I can push them away. Many different ways. It's easy. And one can push them away simply by being arrogant, simply by lording over, or seemingly acting like I'm better than they are. Any number of things. And I know there are times that each one of us speak out of turn. We say things and we come back and we think, I wish I had have never said that. If I could just take it back, if I could just wipe it off the slate, I would wonder who heard what I said and how did it influence them. I hope you will think this week, as you go about this week, as a child of God, if you will look at yourself and determine, think about the things you say, think about the things you do. Be careful of the way one acts because people know who we are. We're an influence. We're an influence for God. But if we're not paying attention, we probably become the greatest influence for Satan. I want to thank you for being here today, and may God bless.